Sacralith, the Archer's Tale, is an archery game. Who knew? But for real. Sacralith is a VR game where you play as an archer with magic abilities. It plays similarly to a tower defense game, where your only goal is to protect the two paladin meat shields escorting you through your journey. You'll travel through a medieval fantasy setting, fighting hordes and hordes of enemies, watching some cutscenes, and probably punch your headset in the wall a few times. It's good fun. At its core, Sacralith is a fast-paced archery game, where you'll be slinging hundreds of arrows per level. You'll mow down armies of enemies, just lines and hordes of them. They just keep coming and coming. It's a tower defense game. You know what it's like. Your arm will get tired, but nothing else. As far as VR games, it's not terribly exerting. The bow feels very responsive, and the quiver is very forgiving once you realize that it can be grabbed from anywhere behind you. Once you stop reaching over your back to grab an arrow, it gets quite a bit better. The game does a good job of rewarding headshots and accuracy with massive bonuses. You can get more damage, you get fun power-ups that can add short-term buffs, slow time, armor piercing, and little shields for your meat wall paladins. All in all, the actual core loop feels very, very good. Hell, even the levels have their own versions of explosive barrels to give a bit more depth to the gameplay. It's fun. Not only did Sacralith nail the archery, but they also built a pretty fun game around it. In no way am I going to say that Sacralith is perfect, but it's pretty solid in everything that it tried to do. So, what did they do well? Well, the game looks quite nice. It has a ton of good quality models and characters on screen all at once, and it looks both good and runs pretty well. And that's quite important for VR to make you sick. Not only that, but they also had shadows, and they used them in a few key places that actually made the scene pop. Still on the artsy side, did I mention that they did cutscenes? They weren't groundbreaking by any means, and they were unskippable, which makes replaying the game a chore. But they added some much needed narrative to the world. And even if it was okay at best, I appreciate the attempt. Plenty of VR games can be summed up as tech demos. This is not one of them. The story was fairly generic fantasy, but it still came across and added to the experience in a positive way. And I can't ask too much more for such a niche audience. Unfortunately, not everything went over quite as well. I certainly had a few issues with Sacralith, ranging from controls to loading to balance, even abilities. So, what went wrong? Honestly, it was quite a lot of minor things that added up and ended up detracting from the overall experience, which is quite sad. One of the most awkward ones would be the turning. The game has set positions that the player can teleport to, and this makes sense in general. The problem arises when the enemies wrap around your position, which makes you need to turn around. I don't know about you, but I don't have the most room for my setup. Usually this is solved with smooth turning or snap turning, but for some reason, odd meter games hate splaster walls, so we don't have either. Another thing for sure would be the loading. The game was insanely slow to load each level, always. Even when running it off of an M2 drive, which threw me for a bit of a loop. You can't get too much faster than that right now. Another very noticeable issue was checkpointing. As far as I can tell, each level had checkpoints, but they were few and far between. It's something, but certainly not enough. In the early game, it's very easy to die, because you're going to be bad at the game. It's very hard to shoot a bow and arrow without a bow and arrow in hand. With each level having sporadic checkpoints, you can easily find yourself in a situation where you kill 100 enemies, die, and then have to restart from scratch. I know some people like that, but I certainly don't. More checkpoints would have been very much appreciated, especially because after dying there is also that decent loading time accompanied by it. Speaking of dying inside, how about a shameless plug? I stream on Twitch every Thursday at 6:30 p.m. PST, as well as Saturdays at 1 p.m. PST. Saturday is usually when I play variety games like this one, so come join me at twitch.tv/FattRoss. Hey! So, where were we? Oh yeah, the death of 1,000 cuts. One of the other things that I noticed a lot was balance, both within the enemies and your abilities. The enemies themselves, for the most part, were good. They had some janky movement. It could be annoying, but the characters were unique, and that carried the combat quite a bit. They have a bunch of variants: speed, health, armor, size. They were all very solid. Like, there were even raid boss enemies to focus down. Overall, they were done very well. The shortcomings actually came down to how they communicate about how they actually operate. At various points in the game, I would find my paladin friends dying, but I wasn't actually sure which unit needed to be focused down to save them. This mainly came into play with the last level, and ended up causing a fair amount of frustration. A little bit of communication and telegraphing would do a lot for Sacralith. Speaking of telegraphing, do you remember we talking about abilities a while ago? Well, here we are. The abilities in this game are really what makes it what it is. The abilities come in the form of special arrows with abilities attached. You can shoot a lightning bolt, summon a shadow archer, heal your friends with the power of Jesus, and much more. The abilities are super fun, and they add a ton to the game. It's really just cool to pull out an arrow that shotguns down a line of enemies. It feels great. The abilities are the best part of the game by far, and they make me want more Sacralith. The only disappointment with the abilities themselves is that the upgrading feels very underwhelming, and you really don't get enough skill points to even max out an entire tree. It really comes down to I just want more over the course of the game. And that's a pretty good place to be, but I want it. Also, the other weird thing is it can be very awkward to select the arrow that you want. It pulls up this radial menu, and you have to kind of fumble around to get the one that you need, and you're definitely going to pull out the wrong one a few times. And that's a little unfortunate. But overall, it really just makes me want a new game plus mode for Sacralith, or, a new game plus hard mode, so I can replay the game over and over and max everything out just to experience it all. I think it'd be great fun. I actually found myself looking for cheats after the fact because I couldn't be bothered to play the game that many times over just to experience it all. New Game Plus. When? I really wanted to experience it all, and I wanted to do it all again. Well, except the ending. The end of this game was unfortunate, to say the least. The entire game was about building up your abilities and your aiming, and, most of the time was actually learning to effectively, use a heal on your allies, freeze a boss unit so you can DPS them down, or work on successive headshots to get the most power-ups you can. Usually in a game like this, the boss will be built to challenge these skills that you've been honing. But not here. The end of Sacralith was a travesty. It quickly turned into a rail shooter that actually disabled all of your abilities and went downhill from there. Sure, it challenged aim, but it didn't do much past that, and felt pretty bad overall. I would have loved to see the abilities incorporated into the ending to challenge your mastery of them, but instead it was a bunch of one-off mechanics out of left field. I won't say much more than that, but it soured the entire experience, to say the least. After cooling down, I actually wanted to go back and replay the game to explore the rest of the abilities. But each time I tried that, I just ended up skipping the ending. And I think that says something. And this leads us to the end of this one. Sacralith is a lot of fun. Like a lot of fun. A lot. It's fast-paced, and it's built mechanically well. Everything plays together beautifully. Even with all the annoyances that I mentioned above, I would absolutely recommend it, even at its normal price. Hell, I really want more. I would love for them to create a Sacralith 2, or a DLC explores what they can do with more abilities. Give real upgrades that change the abilities mechanically, toss in more units, new modes instead of just defend the paladins. There's a lot to explore here, and it's a solid base that they could just tack onto and charge another $20. I'd love to see it. I'd pay. All in all, it was fun, and I think everyone with a VR setup should try it out, even just to see what Odd Meter Games did. It's worth it.
Oh God, why did you do that? Oh, that's an antique statue, a
Later.
masterpiece.